It's been a long time traveling on roads that lead to nowhere, with hopes and dreams that always rot. It's kind of funny, you can basically use that song to describe the Netflix Witcher show. Witcher Medallion's back on, let's review this thing. Well, that's a throwback reference to a bunch of my old Witcher stuff. If you want to look, have a look over there. But yeah, let's just get into this. So the first half of The Witcher Season 3 has come out on Netflix and it's fine. I'm not gonna lie, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but at the end of the day, it's nothing special either. The Netflix Witcher show has declined massively. The first season, I think, is very good. I think it's very solid overall. It has issues as an adaptation, but also as a piece of entertainment. The pacing, specifically the non-linear storytelling, was just a bafflingly weird choice. I have no idea why they thought they should have done that. I remember the showrunner, Lauren Hissrich, was just like, oh, I saw Dunkirk and I really liked that structure and I wanted to implement it into The Witcher Season 1. And it's like, why? Narratively, it doesn't serve a purpose, it's just confusing. But the thing that was special about Season 1 to me was the short stories. It was them adapting short stories well for the most part. They do like mess up on some of the adaptational changes, and because of that, it does weaken the overall stories of those short stories, but for the most part, they're done pretty well. Henry Cavill shined, the show had a very distinctive look. Granted, it was a bit cheap. The Nilfgaardian armor in Season 1 is pretty crap, and the battle sequence was underwhelming, I'll say that. I mean, there is an attempt at spectacle, but then also there are points where it just looks a bit cheap. But either way, I loved Season 1, I thought it was really good. And then going into Season 2, I was very excited. And I think Season 2 even probably has the best episode of the show, which is the Nivellen episode, which is also the first episode of Season 2. And the more you get into Season 2, the worse the show becomes. Specifically the writing. The amount of F-words and just lazy overall writing that kind of negates the overall medieval fantasy tone of The Witcher. It just was very counterintuitive. Like, a lot of the time they kept calling Rience firefuck or fuckface or fuck. I don't even care. Why? That's not funny. It's just, like, crude and immature. Season 2 has some good bits, obviously. Like, Burn Butcher Burn is phenomenal. All of Jaskia's songs in Season 2 are phenomenal. What for yarn is the point of no return. But, controversial opinion here. I actually think Burn Butcher Burn, Horse and Blues, and The Golden One are actually better songs than Toss a Coin to Your Witcher. The more distance I've had from Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, the more I still like it. It's a very good song, but it's also not Jaskia's best song. Joey Beatty is also a godsend, by the way. I just want to mention that. He's perfect. Also, there's the fight with Geralt in Yennefer's temple. That was pretty great, but for the most part, the issue with Season 2 was the fact that the showrunner was like, yeah, we're going to really dive into the Blood of Elves stuff. Yeah, we're going to do all this stuff. You're going to see Vesemir and the witches and blah, blah, blah. But then the more you watch it, the more you go, oh yeah, they like referenced like a line or two from Blood of Elves, or like they'll do a little sequence from the Blood of Elves, but for the most part, it's glorified fanfiction. And the characterization of people like Vesemir and Eskel, who was an asshole for no reason, then just gets turned into a Leshy and then dies. What was the point? Why? And then also nerfing Yennefer in Season 2, having her have no magic, and then her being pretty much useless throughout most of the season, trying to manipulate Ciri into getting her magic from Volethmir and all that stuff, and it's like, why? You're ruining the character dynamics. What is the point? Also, the Nilfgaardian elven politics was just boring. I did not care. They just kept like having that on screen all the time, and I was like, I don't care. It's boring. I haven't gone back to revisit Season 2 because of that. And because Season 2 was less than stellar, I felt my enthusiasm for The Witcher diminish significantly. Specifically just the overall impact of that franchise. I was reading the books. I got to the beginning of Time of Contempt. I got one chapter into Time of Contempt, and then I stopped. I didn't care anymore. My enthusiasm was diminished because of how bad Season 2 was. Also, Netflix Blood Origin or whatever, I didn't watch it. It looked stupid, it looked bad, and from the clips I've seen from it, it looked awful. The only good thing I can say that came from that show is Jaskia's song, The Rise of the Seven. That's a banger. It's phenomenal. Again, Joey Beatty is a godsend. You carry their stories, no oppressor can hide them. We carry their stories and rise, we will rise. Again, banger. It's awesome. So I think it's safe to say that going into The Witcher Season 3, I was less than enthusiastic. There was also the news that going into Season 3, this was going to be Henry Cavill's last season. Henry Cavill left the show due to
undisclosed circumstances.
And according to rumors, it's because he didn't like the fact that the writer's room disrespected the material so much and weren't listening to him as much because he wanted it to be a more faithful adaptation of the books. And so going into Season 3, knowing that this is Henry Cavill's last season, the Uber Witcher fans' last season, the best Geralt of Rivia we possibly could have gotten, it diminished it. Oh yeah, sure, Liam Hemsworth is going to take over and it's going to be great and it's going to make a logical sense of it. I don't care. We're here for Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill is the perfect Geralt of Rivia. And they got rid of him. What? Why? To me, that just shows that the show was dying, and that instead of Netflix listening to Henry Cavill, who is obviously a very smart, intelligent man, also a geek, they just went, nah, we'll just trust our writers to ruin this property. Because again, you leave them to their own devices, and you get things like Witcher Blood Origin, and it's like, why would you lose Henry Cavill like that? That's how you know the show is dying. But anyways, getting into the first part of Season 3, it's fine. I think it is solid overall for the most part. There are a couple of moments where I was like, oh yeah, the bad writing and the lazy writing is really just like creeping its way into here. Namely in the dialogue. The dialogue at points is awful. Like, I'm not even kidding when I say that at one point, I think it's Radovid even, they unironically dropped the word info. They're just like, oh yeah, I heard some gossip and rumor from Nilfgaardian info. And it's like, are you kidding? You didn't have the character say information, you just have it shortened down to info. What? To me, that just broke the immersion of the fantasy straight away. I was just like, yep, okay, you really do not care about this being like a time period setting. Or at least the illusion of a time period setting, because obviously this is fantasy. You can have colloquialisms and such. But to a point, like, BBC's Merlin is full of colloquialisms and stuff. But no one ever said info. Like, when it came to Merlin, you had characters call each other prats and arses and saying things like yeah and sure. But for the most part, it was, you know, somewhat heightened. It knew that it was trying to be a medieval fantasy. Certain parts of The Witcher Season 3 don't do that, and it's very distracting. Specifically when they start to adapt book material, because when they start adapting the book material properly, for example, they adapt the scene from Blood of Elves where Geralt and Ciri visit the elven statue. I've forgotten who it's of, but it's a thing, like, it's like when they're with the Skytell or whatever. When they do that scene, it's pretty much how it's done in the book, although it's much shorter. I remember watching that scene going, oh, they're doing the thing from the book. Oh, but it's like really short and they just like brush over it, okay. But even still, when it comes to a scene like that, when they're adapting elements from the book, they go to the medieval heightened speech. But then, when they start making up their own scenes, they just start randomly like saying gibberish and colloquialisms, and it's like, what's happening here? Also, I'm just gonna address this now. The Radovid Jaskier romance thing was contrived. Now, I'm not saying that them making Jaskier bi is inherently a problem, even though Jaskier in the books is like a renowned womanizer. But Jaskier being bi, I don't think is inherently against his character. I could be completely wrong though, bear in mind, I only read 3 books. But when you think of Jaskier as a concept, as a character, I don't think it's inherently bad that the character is bi. Like, Oberyn Martell was bi in Game of Thrones, it was fine. It worked. The issue I have with the Jaskier Radovid romance was that it just felt very forced because, one, Radovid as a character I haven't come across in the books, but according to Witcher fans, the character is meant to be like underage, so in the show they purposefully aged him up so we can have this weird romance with Jaskier. And 2, every time they showed up on screen and it was supposed to be a romantic scene, they just went, hey look, these two have a crush on each other, they're supposed to be gay or bi. There wasn't anything subtle about it. For example, we'll bring up Call Me By Your Name, right? That to me is a nice gay romantic story. And the chemistry didn't feel forced between Armie Hammer and Timothée Chalamet. It felt organic. It felt natural. Obviously, the Elio and Oliver relationship in Call Me By Your Name is a bit weird because Elio is underage, he's 17, and Oliver I think is like 24. It's a bit weird. Still, Call Me By Your Name is a romantic movie. It's done in a very tasteful and subtle way. When you look at the Jaskier Radovid romance, it's so on the nose of just going, hey look, these two men like each other. I didn't feel it. I didn't care. I was like, you're really just trying to really spoon feed something that isn't supposed to happen. And that I think is the issue with The Witcher Season 3. When they're not following the books, it's really apparent and obvious because the writing just dips significantly. When they do adapt scenes from the books, it's nice to see. I really like the Vespula scene between her and Jaskier. That's great. I remember when she's throwing him out and she's like throwing the loot and stuff. I remember that happening. I think it's in Blood of Elves. Like Geralt runs into Jaskier and Jaskier's being thrown out by Vespula. I think it's in that, or it might be in book 2, in the short story Shard of Ice. Either way, I remember reading that, and when that scene played out, I was like, oh yeah, it's the thing from the book, this is great. But when it just comes to the fan fiction scenes, it's not great. I mean, that's kind of what it is, it's fan fiction. The scene in like episode 4 or something where Jaskier, Geralt, and Ciri are on this boat, and then this like theater troupe joins, and like Jaskier knows them and he's like, oh god, it's these guys. And they're obviously meant to be the obnoxious musical theater crowd that you'd see in like high school or something. But because it's meant to be a modern type thing, it doesn't play well. It clashes with the medieval fantasy. It clashes with Sapkowski's tone of his world. Also, the show just looks cheap now. In season 2, they changed the color grade, they changed the cameras, and you can tell it doesn't look as nice as season 1. Granted, season 1 has its own stylistic thing. I think at times it's a bit too kind of like desaturated and a bit too fan filmy looking. But overall, season 1 has a nice aesthetic. Season 2, they just go full on orange and teal and they up the saturation and they really just sharpen the cameras and they use a lot of wide angle lenses. That's actually a pet peeve I have with this show and a lot of modern filmmaking, where they love their wide angle lenses and they use it in the most inappropriate spots. And it's jarring when they do so. Like, there's this fight scene that happens, I think, in episode 1, and they shoot it on a fairly wide-angle lens, and because of that, it makes the choreography stand out and not look as good. Like, Henry Cavill's doing his own stunts, he's doing all the sword fighting, all the shing-shinging, and it looks good, he's doing it very well, but then you look at a lot of, like, some of the background extras, and they're just, like, flailing about, and they just look stupid, and it's like, what happened here? The wide-angle lens doesn't help either because it makes Henry Cavill look like he's not actually hitting them. It makes the choreography very apparent. Because normally when you shoot a fight scene, you're supposed to go on either a normal or a longer lens because you're supposed to compress the distance between the characters, obviously for safety reasons. And to obviously get a similar wide-looking effect, you have to move the camera backwards. But instead, they want to be close to the action but use a wide-angle lens, and so it just makes everything look small and unrefined and just it doesn't look good. It's not just The Witcher that does this, other things do it too, and it's really annoying. For example, in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, there's like this spiral shot that James Gunn does where the Guardians are fighting, and he uses a wide-angle lens. I don't like it. Also, speaking about the boat scene, there's a part where Ciri is fighting this monster, and she gets pinned down to the ground, and instead of her being tough and fierce and like trying to scramble to her feet to get up and, you know, get a distance and then grab her swords again, she's just like flailing around on the ground, just like, Geralt, help me! And it's like, what? Why? Ciri's tough, she can do it. Because then literally the immediate follow with she gets her sword back and then she does this like awesome kill. But why was she just like laying on the ground like flailing around just being like, Geralt, help me, I'm scared. Also, there's something about the costuming in this season as well that just looks different and cheaper. Like in episode 5, I think there's 5 episodes, when they go to this ball, right? Geralt's in like a fairly medieval looking outfit, okay, sure. But Yennefer's dressed in a sparkly sequin crop top and it's like, what? She looks more like a belly dancer than someone going to a medieval ball. And look, not to make this a massive hate fest or anything, because there are things, again, that I did like. The actors all do a good job in their roles, it's just the materials they're given aren't the best things, but for the most part, they're all good. There's some really nice scenes between Jaskier and Ciri that are very heartwarming. There are some nice scenes between Geralt and Jaskier. There is more of an attempt to adapt the books and lift things from the books. The first episode opens with Yennefer doing her whole dear friend spiel from Blood of Elves, and it's nice, but it is a bit awkward too because it's supposed to play differently. It's like, oh, Geralt and Ciri are now this one big family. They're traveling from place to place to make sure they're evading Nilfgaardians. But at the same time, Geralt and Yennefer aren't entirely speaking with each other, so she's talking to him through letters. And it's like, oh, that's not really what that was supposed to be, but okay. Jaskier's song is nice, although to be fair, that's not the main song that they've like marketed the season on, because he has another song called Ride Witcher Ride that they released early, but it hasn't appeared yet, so I'm assuming they're building up to it, because I think in episode 1 or 2, they set up him singing the song, they're like, oh, tell us a song about The Witcher and blah blah blah, but they haven't paid that song off yet. And again, when it does play, I hope it's going to be awesome, because the song itself is awesome. Ride, Witcher, ride, with the wind that moves the trees. Again, Joey Beatty is a godsend for this show. When Henry Cavill leaves, he is going to be carrying the show on his back. And how for thee. Geralt ends up fighting Rience at one point, and I was like, oh yeah, that's the thing from the book. That's what they're gonna do. They're gonna fight and stuff. I swear though there's a fight in Blood of Elves where Geralt gets like pummeled by Rience. Are they saving that for the second half of the season where Geralt fights Rience again, but Rience is gonna like beat the crap out of him and then he's gonna get like severely injured? Because they've said that the transition between Henry Cavill to Liam Hemsworth is gonna be very organic. So I'm guessing, you know, Henry Cavill's just gonna get his face like bashed in, and then when Geralt wakes up he's gonna look completely different. It's like, oh my god, they healed him but he now looks like Liam Hemsworth. Honestly, if I'm Netflix at this point, I feel like they won't even make it to season 4, or at least they'll make season 4 and that'll be the last season, because I don't see how this show survives past Henry Cavill leaving. What's that butcher bar? And the thing that I find interesting too, right, is that when you look at the Witcher show as a whole, the showrunners are like, oh, we want more monsters, we want more action, we want more adventure. Geralt of Rivia is a Witcher, a monster hunter. He's a hired killer. Why don't you just do throwaway episodes where Geralt just goes off to hunt a monster, like in The Witcher 3? I haven't played that game properly, but I've seen clips from it and I've seen my friends play it. But there are side quests in that game where Geralt just goes off and does this thing because someone has like requested him to do something for them, and he goes and fights a monster, and you find out that there's like a moral quandary or something. You could do something like that for a throwaway episode, not make up some dumb, random, boring stuff. It seems like the showrunner and the writers and the people making this don't have an imagination and excitement to do all this monster hunting stuff, because if you did, you'd make it interesting and cool. Villain of the Week would not be a bad thing to do for this Witcher show, but they don't do it. The only time they really did do it was in season 1, but that's because they were adapting the short stories. But also, they didn't even adapt all the short stories, and it's like, come on. There's still the unrequited love one with Essie and the mermaid. There's still the one with the Doppler that they didn't really do. Like, there are short stories they could have adapted, they just didn't do them. Anyways, I feel like I'm getting off topic here. I feel like I'm just like complaining about the show now. But realistically, when it comes to season 3 part 1, it was fine. There were a bunch of parts I did roll my eyes at because the writing was not great, but then there were also parts where I was like, oh hey, they're doing the thing from the book and they're doing it okay. Yeah, sure, let's go. I haven't fully written off the season as being terrible yet, because overall, the first part was fine. It all just depends on the second half and how wild or bad or great it gets. The acting's still pretty good, the music's still pretty good. In fact, I actually think they got the Witcher 3 composer to co-compose part of season 3, which is actually pretty cool. And you can kind of tell because there's more like Slavic hints in the score, and I'm like, that's pretty cool, that's pretty nice. But realistically, when it comes to The Witcher season 3, the second half is either going to make or break the season for me. Because as of right now, I am enjoying it. In fact, I might be enjoying it a little bit more than bits of season 2, because again, in season 2, there are a handful of moments that I remembered and recognized and was just like, yeah, those are great. But I remember for a lot of the runtime of The Witcher season 2, I was just sitting there going, when are they going to do the book stuff? They said they were going to be doing Blood of Elves stuff, and they haven't really done it. Little did I know that they were going to drag it out and do it at the beginning of season 4, when it's kind of like, you should have just put that at the end of season 3. But whatever, either way, those are just my thoughts on The Witcher season 3 part 1. So far, it's okay. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow on social media, all that good stuff. Until we meet again, see you guys next time.